27 years. That is the time it took to build the Great Pyramid of Khufu, according to ancient sources. 2,300,000 blocks, an average weight of 2.5 tons per block. That means 250 blocks had to be quarried, transported, and set into position every single day for nearly 3 decades. Not just delivered, not just stacked. Quarried from bedrock, shaped to fit, hauled across desert or water, lifted onto the growing structure, and locked into place with mortar. Every day, for 27 years. The numbers do not pause for weather, accidents, tool failure, or the death of workers. They do not account for the fact that Egypt had no iron, no pulleys, and no wheels suitable for heavy stone transport. And yet the pyramid stands, perfectly aligned to true north, leveled across 13 acres of bedrock, faced with white limestone so tightly fitted that a blade cannot slip between the joints. The mystery is not how the blocks were stacked. The mystery is how the entire supply system stayed alive long enough to finish the job. That is exactly what we are going to find out. The Great Pyramid sits on the Giza Plateau, a limestone shelf on the western bank of the Nile. It is the largest of 3 pyramids built during Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 4,500 years ago. The official explanation is straightforward. Pharaoh Khufu commissioned the structure as a tomb. His architects designed it. His workforce built it. The limestone came from nearby quarries. The granite came from Aswan, 500 miles to the south. The casing stones came from Tura, across the river. Tens of thousands of workers labored in rotating shifts. The project took decades. When it was finished, Khufu was buried inside, and the pyramid became a monument to divine kingship. That is the story taught in textbooks, repeated in documentaries, and accepted by mainstream Egyptology. It is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because it treats the pyramid as an isolated object, a pile of stone on a plateau, it ignores the fact that the pyramid was the end result of a supply chain so vast, so coordinated, and so relentless that it functioned more like a factory than a tomb. And the evidence for that supply chain is still there, not hidden, not erased, just ignored. Start with the stone. The Great Pyramid contains roughly 2,300,000 blocks. Most of them are limestone, quarried directly from the Giza Plateau itself. The quarry is not a mystery. It is visible. A massive U-shaped depression sits just south and east of the pyramid, a bathtub carved into the bedrock. The stone was not hauled from distant mountains. It was pulled from the ground a few hundred meters away. But that proximity does not make the task simple. Each block had to be cut free from the bedrock using copper chisels and wooden wedges. Copper is soft. It dulls quickly. A single chisel might last a few hours before it needed resharpening. That means the site required a constant supply of fresh copper, a forge to melt and recast the tools, and a workforce dedicated entirely to tool maintenance. Thousands of chisels, thousands of hammers, thousands of wooden handles, all of them consumables, all of them needing replacement. The quarry was not just a hole in the ground, it was an industrial operation. Then there is the casing stone. The outer layer of the pyramid was not rough limestone. It was fine white limestone from Tura, a quarry on the east bank of the Nile, roughly 15 kilometers away. This stone was softer, easier to carve, and polished to a reflective finish. But getting it to Giza required boats. The Nile does not run past the pyramid. It runs at the base of the plateau, more than a kilometer away. That means the blocks had to be loaded onto barges, floated across the river, unloaded at a harbor, and then dragged uphill to the construction site. The harbor is not theoretical. Geologists have identified remnants of an artificial canal system that brought boats directly to the base of the plateau during the annual flood season. The Diary of Merer, a papyrus logbook discovered in 2013, confirms this. Merer was a crew leader. His diary records daily operations shipping fine limestone from Tura to Giza by boat. He names his crew. He records the number of trips. He describes the loading process. The diary is 4,500 years old. It is not a legend. It is a work order. Now consider the granite. The king's chamber, deep inside the pyramid, is roofed with massive granite beams. Each beam weighs roughly 70 tons. Granite does not exist at Giza. The nearest source is Aswan, 500 miles to the south. Moving a 70-ton block over land is not feasible with ancient technology. The only option is water. During the Nile flood, the river swells and becomes navigable for heavy transport. Specialized barges were built to carry the granite blocks. These barges had to be wide enough to support the load, shallow enough to navigate the river, and strong enough not to crack under the weight. Once the barge reached Giza, the block had to be unloaded, dragged to the pyramid, and lifted into position inside the structure. The king's chamber contains 9 of these beams. 9 trips. 9 70-ton loads. And that is just one room. The logistics of moving granite from Aswan to Giza required an entire fleet of boats, a network of harbors, and a construction calendar synchronized with the flood cycle. This was not improvisation. This was industrial planning. But stone is only half the problem. The other half is people. The Great Pyramid required a workforce of tens of thousands. Not slaves, skilled laborers. Archaeologists have excavated the workers' settlement at Height El Garab, just south of the Giza Plateau. The site is enormous. It includes dormitories, workshops, storage facilities, and bakeries. The bakeries are particularly revealing. They were designed to produce thousands of loaves of bread every day. Bread was the staple food of ancient Egypt, the currency of labor. Workers were paid in rations: bread, beer, onions, fish, and meat. The amount of food required to sustain a workforce of this size is staggering. Cattle bones found at the site show isotope signatures consistent with animals raised in the Nile Delta, more than 100 kilometers away. That means a steady supply chain of livestock, driven overland to Giza, slaughtered on site, and distributed to the workers. The workers ate well. Skeletal analysis shows a diet rich in protein. These were not starving conscripts. They were valued laborers, fed like athletes, and given medical care when injured. Healed fractures, set bones, even evidence of brain surgery. The site had doctors. It had administrators. It had scribes tracking every delivery, every ration, every quota. The pyramid was not built by anonymous labor. It was built by a managed workforce operating inside a bureaucratic machine. And then there is water. Not for drinking, for transport. Recent experiments have shown that pouring a small amount of water on sand in front of a sledge reduces friction by up to 50%. That means a team of workers could pull twice the load with the same effort. But it also means the site required a constant supply of water, not just for the workers, for the sand, for the ramps, for the sledges. The Nile was nearby, but water does not transport itself. It had to be carried in jars, loaded onto carts, and distributed across the construction site. That requires labor. That requires organization. That requires someone calculating how much water is needed per sledge per day and ensuring the supply never runs out. The pyramid was not built by brute force. It was built by optimized labor, supported by a logistics network that treated water, food, tools, and stone as inputs in a production system. Now stop right here, because the next check is the one that breaks the official narrative. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north, with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree. The base is level to within 2 centimeters across 13 acres. The casing stones fit together so tightly that mortar was not needed for structure, only for fine adjustment. This is not rough construction. This is precision engineering. And precision engineering requires precision planning. The pyramid could not be built by trial and error. Every block had to be cut to size before it left the quarry. Every block had to be marked with its destination: north side, south side, layer 42, row 16. Archaeologists have found red ink markings on blocks inside the pyramid. labels written by the workers to indicate where each piece belonged. The pyramid was not assembled randomly. It was assembled like a kit. And that means someone, somewhere, had a master plan, a blueprint, a construction schedule that accounted for every block, every delivery, every crew, every day. The level of coordination required is not ancient, it is modern. It is the kind of planning you see in skyscraper construction, not in a civilization that supposedly lacked writing. Systems capable of handling that much data. But the data exists. The diary of Merer is proof. The red ink markings are proof. The pyramid itself is proof. The question is not whether the Egyptians had the planning capacity. They clearly did. The question is how that capacity was developed, maintained, and passed down across generations. Because the Great Pyramid was not the first pyramid. It was the culmination of decades of experimentation, and the infrastructure that made it possible did not appear overnight. It was built over time, refined over time, and then, after the Fourth Dynasty, it was abandoned. The pyramid stopped. The supply chain collapsed. The workers' city was dismantled, and the Giza Plateau returned to silence. That is the part the textbooks do not explain. Not how the pyramid was built, but why the system that built it disappeared. What nobody notices yet is that the Giza Plateau was not a passive construction site. It was an active landscape, engineered to support the pyramid project. The natural topography was used as infrastructure. Wadis, the dry riverbeds that cut through the plateau, were turned into transport corridors. Ramps were not built on top of the pyramid. They were built into the landscape, using the natural slopes to reduce the hauling distance. The quarry itself was positioned to minimize transport. The harbor was dug to bring boats as close as possible. The workers' city was placed downwind to keep dust and smoke away from the construction zone. Every element of the site was chosen for logistical efficiency. The pyramid was not placed on the Giza Plateau because it looked impressive. It was placed there because the plateau had the stone, the elevation, and the proximity to the Nile required to make the project feasible. The landscape was part of the machine, and the machine was designed to run continuously for decades. That level of site planning does not happen by accident. It happens because someone understood the entire system before the first block was cut. Someone mapped the quarry, the harbor, the transport routes, and the staging areas before construction began. Someone calculated the labor requirements, the food supply, the tool consumption, and the construction timeline before Khufu even took the throne. The pyramid was not a monument built by a king. It was the output of a system built by engineers. But here's the thing. The system was not unique to Giza. It was replicated. Khufu's son Khafre built the second pyramid. Khafre's successor, Menkaure, built the third. Each pyramid used the same supply chain, the same quarries, the same harbor, the same workers' city, the same bakeries, the same tool production. The infrastructure was not dismantled between projects. It was maintained, expanded, improved. The Giza Plateau was not a construction site. It was a construction industry. And the pyramids were not individual monuments. They were products. The official story treats each pyramid as a personal project, commissioned by a king, built for his tomb, and finished when he died. But the logistics tell a different story. The logistics say that the pyramids were built by a permanent institution, a state-run construction apparatus that outlasted individual rulers and operated according to a long-term plan. The kings were clients, the institution was the builder, and the institution had resources, knowledge, and infrastructure that no single king could have assembled. That is the part that does not fit the tomb narrative. Because tombs are personal, tombs are finite, tombs do not require a permanent industrial base. But the Giza Plateau was not built for one king. It was built for a dynasty. And the infrastructure that supported it was not temporary. It was designed to last. The workers' city was not a camp. It was a planned settlement with streets, drainage, and permanent buildings. The harbor was not a dirt ramp. It was an engineered canal with stone embankments. The quarry was not a hole. It was a managed extraction site with marked blocks and organized transport. This was not a project. This was a program. And this is where the explanation breaks. Because programs require institutions. Institutions require continuity. Continuity requires knowledge transfer. And knowledge transfer requires documentation. The Egyptians had writing. They had papyrus. They had scribes. But the documents that describe the construction of the Great Pyramid do not exist. Not because they were lost, because they were never found. The Diary of Marir is the only surviving logbook. One crew, one season, one shipment of casing stone. That is all. No master plans, no blueprints, no construction manuals, no administrative archives, no payroll records, no tool inventories, no stone tallies, no labor schedules. The entire bureaucratic apparatus that built the pyramid has vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. As if the system that built the pyramids was deliberately erased from the record. The pyramids remain. The quarries remain. The workers' city remains. But the knowledge that made them possible is gone. That is not an accident. That is a pattern. And the pattern suggests that the pyramid project was not just a construction program. It was a controlled operation. One that left physical evidence but no institutional memory. One that produced the most recognizable monuments in human history but left no instructions, no records, and no explanation for how the system worked. The official story says the pyramids were built by the 4th dynasty, and then the tradition ended. But traditions do not end. They evolve, they decline, they transform, they leave traces. The pyramid tradition did not decline, it stopped. Completely. No more massive stone pyramids. No more precision engineering. No more supply chains capable of moving 70-ton granite beams 500 miles. The infrastructure that made Giza possible did not fade. It disappeared. And that disappearance is more mysterious than the construction. So what are we looking at? Not a tomb, not a monument, not a personal project. We are looking at the remnants of a system that treated the Giza Plateau as an industrial park, a system that used the Nile as a highway, a system that organized tens of thousands of workers into competing labor gangs with names like the Drunkards of Menkaure to maintain production speed, a system that fed those workers a high-protein diet, gave them medical care, and rotated them through shifts to prevent burnout, a system that imported copper from Sinai, timber from Lebanon, and granite from Aswan, a system that produced 500,000 tons of gypsum mortar and burned enough fuel to deforest the surrounding region, a system that leveled 13 acres of bedrock using water-filled trenches as a giant spirit level, a system that aligned the structure to true north using stellar observation, a system that marked every block with red ink tags to ensure it was placed in the correct position, a system that ran continuously for decades and then vanished without leaving a single administrative document. That is not a construction project. That is a civilization operating at a level of coordination that should not be possible without computers, without diesel engines, without steel tools, and without a written bureaucracy capable of managing millions of data points. But the evidence says it happened. The pyramid is the proof. The question is not how the Egyptians built the pyramid. The question is what kind of system they had that made it possible, and why that system left no trace except the stones. The real achievement was not the pile of stone. The real achievement was the logistics network that could keep building it. The quarry that ran for decades without exhausting the workforce. The harbor that brought boats to the base of the plateau. The bakeries that produced thousands of loaves every day. The medical system that kept workers alive and productive. The tool industry that recycled copper chisels faster than they doled. The transport network that moved 250 blocks a day for 27 years. The scheduling system that synchronized stone delivery, labor shifts, and construction phases. The precision planning that ensured every block fit into the structure without trial and error. That is the system that built the pyramid. And that system does not fit the official story. Because the official story treats the pyramid as a monument. But monuments are static. Monuments are finished. Monuments are about the past. The pyramid is not a monument. It is evidence. Evidence of a supply chain so advanced, so organized, and so efficient that it functioned like a modern construction company, operating 4,500 years ago. And the most unsettling part is that the system worked perfectly for decades, and then it stopped. Not because the Egyptians forgot how to build pyramids, but because the system that made them possible was no longer needed, or no longer allowed. The stones remember what the archives erased. The pyramid is not a mystery because we do not know how it was built. It is a mystery because we are not supposed to ask why the system that built it disappeared.